Sure,
Yeah.
I'll share a copy with Maria.
Maria, did you get that email? District 86?
I just got it. I was in a meeting and I was like, District 86.
If you got another one, Maria and I were going to
We'll
share a
touch
copy.
base
We're
with-
meeting next week.
You guys ready? Yep. Okay, great. Welcome to the Tuesday, September 10th, 2019 Environmental Commission meeting of the City of Joliet. If the clerk could please do roll call.
Chairman Davidson,
Present.
Commissioner Riley,
Here.
Commissioner Herco, Commissioner Horn,
Here.
Commissioner Kaufman, Commissioner Rayfak,
Here.
Commissioner Riggs,
Here.
and Commissioner Rodriguez.
Here.
There is a quorum present. As is always the case, we allow an interactive dialogue with those who are attending the Environmental Commission meeting. We find that that's the best way to get feedback. So for those members of the public who are here, I will recognize you if you want to interject at any point in time throughout our presentations of the particular panel discussion we're having. Also, if there is any member of the public that's here that can't stay for the whole thing and has something on their chest that they need to get off now, they're welcome to come forward. But other than that, we'll just do it as, we'll do, public comments at the end and throughout. Anybody that needs to get out of here and has something to say? Okay. We need to approve the minutes from the last meeting. I know I was not here at the last meeting, so were the minutes?
The minutes were not completed at this point. We're having a problem with the system. They've got it fixed now, but it was not in time for me to get them published for the
Okay.
meeting, so I'll have 2 sets of minutes for the next meeting.
Fair enough. So we'll have those for approval at the next meeting. So we'll move right into discussion of the alternative water source study status and schedule update. Nick.
Okay, thank you. All right, so the phase one of the study, which was taking place from August 2018 until January 2019, was complete. Phase two started this February and is still underway. It includes a detailed analysis of the 5 selected options identified in phase one, identification of the improvements for each viable alternative and their associated costs, refinement and prioritization of the phase two criteria, which includes control, governance, maintenance, redundancy, and risk to schedule, and the selection of an alternative water source at the completion. So the phase two study identified the following sources as options to further study, which includes the Kankakee River, the Illinois River, Lake Michigan water option through the Chicago Department of Water Management, a Lake Michigan option through the DuPage Water Commission, and a Lake Michigan option with a new Indiana intake. This map just shows the location of the options that we're still studying in relation to Joliet. So the goals of phase two are to determine the extent of the improvements required for each of the selected water source alternatives in order to establish life cycle costs, further refine and prioritize decision criteria, cost, governance, control, risk, and then regional versus Joliet alone. Continued stakeholder engagement on the importance of the water study and water conservation, and provide the information necessary for the City Council to select an alternative water source by the end of this year. So the items completed since the last Environmental Commission meeting include a conference call with IEPA held on August 15th, a meeting with the City of Chicago, which was held on August 21st. Request for information from potential water suppliers was received on August 22nd. And then a prepared draft technical memorandum on non-revenue water reduction, and received responses from community and industry regional water questionnaires. So the anticipated items that will be completed next month are River water sampling will continue with sampling mid-September. We are actually going out tomorrow to collect that last round of samples. When we get the results back, we will prepare a technical memorandum to submit to the IEPA to review the data. We are scheduling a meeting with the IEPA and US EPA in early October to discuss the steps to switch our source. And we are preparing a technical memorandum on funding strategies. Now, Tracy Morris from Images Inc. is going to come up and talk about our public relation activities.
Hi, good evening, good afternoon. Was there a slide before that, though? I know. Did we have this slide? Yeah, so you went, okay. All right, so we had quite a few different activities going on. Here you'll see between billboards for the water conservation campaign type of activities, the social media posts, e-blast, and stakeholder list. For that, it's been pretty heavy activity. We've had 447 stakeholders added to the list since the outreach has begun in this project, with a total of 766 stakeholders that have signed up. And then, of course, we have the Environmental Commission meetings are now being televised as well. And then I guess this was out of order here. Okay. So we had past activities as far as the events go. We've had, the past month we had the Joliet prison break, and then upcoming we have the Chamber of Commerce presentation. I think we've talked about in the past meetings about the community survey that went out. We began earlier this summer. For the benefit of those who hadn't heard from the past meetings, we made that available on May 13th in English and Spanish. And the goal of this initial survey was just to get a general understanding, kind of feeling of where the community is and what they know of the issue, or what they know of this project. We distributed this survey through local events, advertised through social media, certainly sent out an e-blast to the stakeholder list, and then advertised through the project website. The survey consisted of 6 basic questions that we asked people. So one of the first questions here, and this, and I will say, I guess go back, that this, let me go back here, sorry, I missed some data here. The responses that we've received so far as of September 11th, we have in English 448, and in Spanish we've received 14. Now this survey is still open for people to take, but so this data that I'm going to present here is just through September 3rd. So the first question we asked is, we really wanted to get an idea that and make sure that we're reaching folks that are from Joliet. We did receive, and we did do that. We received only 16 folks that responded that do not live or work in Joliet or Will County. We wanted to get an understanding of the age groups. As we continued, as you know, from the past meetings, we've talked about a PR and public involvement plan. We want to make sure we're reaching the different age groups. And so part of that survey is of those that took this, how old are you? So we felt that we got a pretty good mix of ages of people that took the survey. Certainly, as you see, the 18 to 24 years old, we have to, focus. That tells us we have to focus on efforts in advertising to the younger generation. And the next question was, how long have you been aware of the city of Joliet's water being depleted? And this is good. We look at the data here, only 19% had no idea. So that means that the efforts in the past and what has been going on since the Rethink Water Joliet has started, we have reached. This graphic without having, I'll just explain it without having to, all of you guys do the math here, is really to take a look at those age groups that responded, and then how many of them, based on those answers, about how long they've known about this, or did they know about the situation in Joliet or not. When you look at, I'd like to break it down in more percentages rather than numbers there. So between 18 and 24 years old, about 44% were unaware of the issue. So again, it kind of goes back to getting to that demographic as well. But certainly the age group of 55 to 64, 67%, followed closely by the over 65, which was 62%. So just again, another way of kind of slicing and dicing the data there that we've received. Asking the question, it's a yes or no question, but do you conserve water? Now, certainly there's a lot of different perceptions when you look at, somebody would say that they conserve water. So it looks like, there's 80% response rate. Looks like they believe they conserve water. And then going back to, we wanted to take a look and make sure that when we developed our outreach plan and our PR plan, and get a pulse on how people prefer to get their information. And by the look of this, this is very, it's very much in line with the plan. You could take a look. There's just not a one-size-fits-all. So our approach of getting things out through email, that's obviously the most popular there, mail, website, social media, the city's newsletter, in-person meetings, and then there's and other there as well. So we are on the right path of getting this information out to people, and it will be important as we move forward. I think as a whole with the survey, it really allows us to at least get this introductory information, and then as we move forward, will guide us in developing some more in-depth survey questions in the next phase. And before I go on, I turn it back over to Nick. Any questions? Or?
Yeah, I do. 448 people. What does this tell us? Besides the 448 people told us, who do they represent? What kind of representation is it? Because it sounds pretty pathetic to me. I mean, we're not getting the message out, is what it tells me.
Well, you're on the number of the 449, right? So when it comes to, when you look at from a marketing standpoint, when you look at, if there's nothing that is very life-threatening, our fear factors are put into place. It's harder to reach people.
We got to scare the hell out of them to get them to do this.
Well,
right?
I mean, we are taking a look at the survey. I mean, we chose to do as a group here, as a team, to do this introductory survey for a reason at this point in time. It was started in May, just to get some basic information of like how well do people know things, and then we'll build upon that as the phase 2 continues, and so we can get more of an idea out, of information about the study as we talk about alternatives and things like that. So you're just saying that the 449.
That's not
I mean, we've sent it out. E-Blast, you look at the number of stakeholders that have signed up, was a lot more than when we started earlier this year. Sent it out on other means throughout the newsletters for the city.
I'm sure it's not for lack of
Yeah.
effort. That's not what
Yeah.
that's not
Okay.
what I'm saying and what I'm asking about. 450 people responded, what do they really represent? I mean, can we assume that the other, I don't know, 149,500 don't care? Is that what we're supposed to assume? Or are we?
Well,
are we
you're
missing
trying to,
something?
you're trying to dissect what
Are we missing
what we're
something?
not getting. Yeah, well, for those 6 questions, they're very basic questions, right? So we're not asking, well, will they, you know, later on, when we get to the harder questions of financials and things like that, I mean, those will be a
Ask
different
Karen.
set. Those will be a different set, but
Ask
right
Karen.
now, we have to understand who even knows about the study, whoever knows that there's an issue. So what we do know is that only 16%, or 19, what was the number, 19 surveys were outside of Will County and Joliet. So what we do know is that the people getting in the information are really affected folks, right? The age. So if we know we can dissect the data of the population in Joliet by generational as well. But this will help us to determine extra ways that we have to do advertising and social media, or get things out a different way to the younger generation compared
How
to the older.
satisfied are you with their response?
I think that the numbers are good. We had just it's just a small sampling. When you look at the city of Joliet, yes, absolutely.
So we're all disappointed.
I mean, I guess what's the expectation to have?
Right, what is the expectation?
You know, when you look at that can have some. They have a computer, that have a phone to take it on through SurveyMonkey. I mean, you can take a look at the, other avenues. I know at the events, they have been taking these surveys out in paper. So what are some other avenues to get to folks that want to partake in this that don't maybe have those means either? So.
I don't think it's the method, the methods of return. I just don't think it's getting out there. I don't think they're paying attention. And that's going to make it tougher for everybody.
Or
going
later
forward.
down the road, you're thinking?
Because they're going to all say, what happened? Where did this come from? Just a thought. I think we need to do,
Yeah.
maybe
I
we
mean,
need to hire some animals to go on TV and say, hey, I'm going to be thirsty if we don't do something here. And it's going to cost us a lot of money. So, I just think that so far the effort's been pretty anemic. I'm not saying it's your fault. I'm just saying it hasn't worked, I don't think.
Historically, over 20 years of working with the public and stakeholders on infrastructure projects, you see folks, and when I say the fear, it's very remarkable. If you look on a highway project, until they see road lines on a map, then they come. So, but I hear you, and I think we'll take this back to the team, of course, of maybe there's some additional. I mean, the survey is still open, so.
Well, I think your argument is probably the same as mine.
Yeah.
We need to get this accelerated so people get the fear of what's going on out there, so that they can be aware of what's coming.
Mhm.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so next month 9, October, the City of Chicago is going to come into the October 8th Environmental Commission meeting and do a presentation. And the educational topic is going to be Are Grants an Option? And then the end of the month deliverable will be a draft technical memorandum on funding strategies. And the next steps, there will be one-on-one discussions with the City Council and Environmental Commission members the week of November 4th. The presentation of the Phase 2 study at a joint workshop meeting will be held on November 12th. Environmental Commission recommendation at the December 10th meeting, and a presentation of the recommendation for the alternative water source will be at the December 17th council meeting. Anybody have any questions?
Yes, Bruce?
Yeah, if you go back to the slide, the one-on-ones between the environmental commission and the city council, will that be open to the public?
Those will not. The November 12th joint workshop will be.
Hi, I'm Joan from Will County.
If you could, I'm sorry, we didn't make Bruce do that, but he's grandfathered in because he's been here all the time. If you would come up and state your name, and the clerk knows Bruce, so.
Hi, I know Maria and a few of you guys, but my name is Joan O'Keefe. I work for Will County Land Use, RR&E, and we've been working with Allison and Amy lately on the ball field promotion and some PR things. My regular job at Will County is to go to schools. I do in-person presentations, and every year I send out something to schools, and different schools request free presentations. I've told Allison, I see in the whole county probably about between 10 and 13,000 kids a school year. And last year I worked with 5 Joliet schools. So just an idea with this last discussion of PR, I was wondering, could you guys bring a survey to each school in Joliet, and either it's sent home electronically because they communicate with the parents electronically, or in a flyer, or I have added to my list of tasks, learn about water conservation. So Allison and I have talked about possibly implementing something in my presentations to the Joliet kids. And then I had one more idea. Oh, have you done anything with your water bill? Like answer a survey, you know, I know they'd have to have a computer or maybe a telephone line to call in and answer questions, because I realize apathy is real until you do threaten people with some type of, you know, they're afraid of something or the reason to answer questions. But I think all of those are viable and good
That's
ideas.
great.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Joan,
Yes.
I would like to invite you to our next Water Conservation Subcommittee. It's going to be September 25th here in the boardroom here at 3 o'clock.
Okay.
And then that's where we
Talk
can,
about that
yeah, we can
some
talk
more.
about some of that and kind
Okay.
of move it to action.
All right. Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would suggest we move it to action before then. I mean, if we're gonna do that.
Yeah, we will absolutely reach out to
Oh,
the
yeah.
schools. So the water bill, we did stuff,
And some
the
of our
water
other
bills with
ideas.
the survey, the link to the survey, but we will definitely reach out. Hopefully you can help out with some contacts for the schools and try to get it out there. Absolutely.
Yes, sir.
Ben Comar, 606 Western, Joliet. I commend the Water Commission for all the good work you've done, but I think the methodology you're using is terribly flawed. And let me back up and explain what I mean. I've spent more than half of my life in software engineering. In the beginning, we used what's called a waterfall method, which is essentially what you're using. You're starting a process and you're going from phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and you're building on what you have. The problem is, once you identify the way you start, you continue along that path no matter what happens. Right now, I think we should have a different methodology. One of the things that the software community has discovered is what's called agile methodologies. And what that entails is basically taking a methodology where you start with an idea, you know, you prototype it or you publicize it or something and go through an iteration and see where you're at. And I think what needs to happen now, there's two main things that I've seen that are issues. 500 people out of 149,000 residents is an absolute abysmal failure. I would like to see 10, 15, 20%. And whatever you have to do to get us engaged, I'm a resident, you know, say that the water rates are going to go up 3 times. Have animals looking for water, whatever it takes. I mean, you really need to get people engaged because this is a serious issue. This is an issue that is going to affect this community for the next 25, 50, 75, 100 years. Okay? That's number one. Number two, I think if we've got, when I look at your timeline there, I walked in this afternoon thinking, okay, we've got 3.5 months to a decision. No, we've got 2.5 months to a decision. So my recommendation is we are a little more than 30 miles away from the largest source of fresh water in the world. Why are we talking about rivers? We need to be talking about, for the next 2.5, 3.5 months, what source are we going to use to get water from Lake Michigan? Come on, that's the reality. Because if you project this down, if you project where you're sitting right now, project it out 10, 20, 25, 50 years, you're going to be, if you do anything less than that, you're going to be kicking yourself. Come on. The whole process, the whole decision-making process and all the logistics concerned with trying to figure out where we're going to get water from Lake Michigan with 2.5 months or 3.5 months to go is a huge undertaking. So please consider that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Board, I think we talked about that already. I think there's been several people up here that have said that very thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, one more. Yes. Yes, sir.
My name is Jason Stiers. I work with Amita Health at the Joliet Hospital, and I work in the renal dialysis unit. We're trying to go green, recycle and reusing, and one thing we can't control is how much water that comes in. We per month, it's 33,300 gallons is rejected from our RO system, and I don't know if there's any other ways we can use that water or ways that the hospital or Amita Health can help with the community to educate people about conserving the water here in Joliet.
Maria?
So I'd like to help out in any way that I would be able to.
So I would like to invite you to the next subcommittee. We have a subcommittee which focuses on water conservation. It meets Wednesday, the 25th at 3 o'clock right here.
Okay.
And that would be great to have
good.
you partner with us.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
you. Banner day for me.
Okay, thank you, Nick. So just so I'm crystal clear, I don't know where I heard this, but I heard that so when I saw it I thought there was a discussion about maybe not being on track for December, so we're still on track for December.
Yes, currently.
Okay, all right, perfect, okay. All right, anything further from the commission members? Okay, great. Discussion education topic number 12, climate change and potential impacts to water sources.
Thank you, Chairman.
Take it away.
Yeah, so we, as has been the practice each month, we've put together some general information and the links. Oh, thanks.
And just so everybody in the audience knows.
I'm sorry.
Where are
I'm
you from?
Joe Johnson with Stantec. We're one of the engineering consultants working with CMT and EEI on the project.
Thanks, Joe.
But so as has been the custom each month, we've been putting together information and resources on various topics that we think are helpful to basically inform the commission and the public about the issues related to the water problem. And this month, the topic related to climate change and its potential impact on water sources. I won't go through the details we provided. There were a lot of links there. I think the basic takeaway is that there is a lot of information out there. There's a lot of competing information. In general, the data that's come from the state suggests that we are likely to see some more intense storms in the future. We may be likely to see some more intense periods of drought. Both of those have the potential to impact us from a water supply standpoint. But in terms of an overall long-term trend that's dramatically going to change the amount of water that people use on an average basis over the year, it's not clear that there's a preponderance of evidence that pushes us strongly one way or the other. So the projections that the team has put together for Joliet remain to developed the two supply scenarios, one for a 30 million gallon per day maximum day demand and one for a 60 million gallon per day maximum demand. And that's kind of what we're working towards. So any other questions on the material that was sent out or comments?
Bruce?
I'll do it the last. And, yeah, Bruce Renwick, 1508 West Acres Road, Joliet. I read the material from the State Water Survey and the EPA. I didn't see any place where it correlated drought to river flow conditions. And that would seem to me to be a critical item if you're looking to take water from the Kankakee or Illinois. If you're in a prolonged 5 or 6 day drought, water use is probably going to go up in the city. And if river flows drop, you're going to have to come off the river. So I just wondered if I missed something.
No, that's an important question. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. With regards to sources, there's really, based on the projections that are out there right now from the Lake Michigan side, there's not a concern about the availability of Lake Michigan water for supply for the type of demands that we're meeting. For the river sources, as we've talked about before, there are seasonal variations. And so the way the project's being developed right now, all of the river water alternatives include plans for maintenance of the city's wells to be able to provide backup supply during periods of extended drought. And those costs are being baked into the overall alternatives so that we can provide an apples-to-apples comparison in terms of reliability. So you're right, that is a concern, and that's how it's being addressed in the alternatives. Okay? So then, yeah, I'm sorry. So this information was mailed out. It is available on the website for people to access. And obviously, if questions come up in the future, please let us know. We're happy to try to provide more information. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff Freeman. And Jeff is going to talk a little bit about the non-revenue water reduction plan and how that fits into the overall program.
Thank you, Joe. As Joe stated, my name is Jeff Freeman. I'm with EEI. I'm part of the consulting team working on this project. Happy to be here tonight to talk about non-revenue water. I'm not happy about non-revenue water for obvious reasons, but I'm happy to be able to talk about it and how it relates specifically to this project because it is pretty important as we've talked about in the past. Before we get into some of the details, wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page relative to some key terms that we're going to talk about as we go through it. First of all, the unbilled authorized consumption is as listed on there. For instance, when the fire department goes out and they flush hydrants, they're authorized to do that, but essentially nobody is billed for that, and that needs to be accounted for. In the non-revenue water, also at the water treatment plant, it takes a certain amount of water to be able to produce finished water to the system. That would not be billed to anybody, but it is part of the equation. The next two are probably the most important as we walk through this, the apparent losses and the real losses. Those are essentially the main losses within a waterworks system. The apparent losses are those non-physical losses, such as perhaps theft. If somebody goes to the fire hydrant that is unauthorized, then that would be an apparent loss. Or if the meters throughout the system are inaccurate, or if maybe during billing procedures as meters are read, they get into the accounting system, a bill goes out. If there's a problem in that chain, that would be considered an apparent loss. A real loss is those physical losses. So if a water main breaks, for instance, or a water service has a leak on it, that's water that got out onto the system. It wasn't actually going to hit anybody's meter in their house. It just leaks into the ground, or in some cases, I suppose, could even leak onto the surface. The non-revenue water then is all three of those first three together, apparent plus real plus unbilled authorized. And then the water loss, the specific water losses would be apparent plus real. Lastly, we'll say that there is a calculated, unavoidable real loss. Now, as we talked about in phase one, there is software developed by the American Waterworks Association, and specifically through the M36 manual, that helps communities compute their non-revenue water. And no water system is going to be able to get their losses down to zero. It's just impossible, especially imagine the scale of pipes and services, the fact that meters aren't 100% perfect measuring. There is going to be an unavoidable real loss in the system. Ideally, that's minimized based on essentially pressure and length of the system, but there is a true floor that the City of Joliet would not be able to likely would not be able to achieve below. When we were here as part of phase 1 talking about the water audit, we were focusing on FY 2016 and FY 2017. We have updated the water audit for FY 2018, and on this slide we have some key performance indicators or metrics for what we have found. Overall, probably the first line is the one that will stick out the most to folks. Our non-revenue water actually went up in FY18. It was in, let's say, the mid-20s, 16 and 17, and then got up to 29.3 in 2018. Before I go any further, I should state that the column on the right is a benchmarking set of data. They don't have data for everything, but for those components that they do, just to see how we measure against the national data that's out there, it shows you. The next line is the non-revenue water as a percent by cost. So we're actually not bad, I would say, within the system. Yes, we're about 2% above the national data set. Part of the reason with that is currently the cost of producing water for the City of Joliet's pretty low, especially if you look across the nation as to why the non-revenue as a percent of operating cost lies there. The next two lines are specific numbers and then total up between apparent real losses. I've got some charts to show you that in a second, so I'm not going to go through those. And then the couple other metrics there, you can see again how things look from at least a run through on the software. The apparent losses seem to be below industry standard, or across the nation the real losses are above. Data validity we talked about a lot during phase 1. It's essentially, data into the software and model. How confident in that data can we be? Ultimately, we were able to boost the confidence up to a data validity score of 66. However, we are still below the national average, or the data set that's out there that's as high as 80. So we'll continue, staff I know is continuing to work on that year to year from the utilities department to the billing as well. A couple graphs just to show you the significance of and why we put water losses in the different buckets. The left graph focused on volume, a percentage by volume of the real losses, apparent losses, unbilled authorized consumption, etc. And you can see that the large piece of the pie there is the real losses. Again, those are the water main breaks, those are the leaks in the system that get out of the water mains or services before it ever gets to the meter. The parent losses are even below 10%. But if you look at the dollar amount, the split is actually, from a cost perspective, is as high as 50%. And that's because that water costs a lot more when you're losing it, meaning it passed through somebody's meter and we didn't bill it at the full water rate that we have established. The real loss is only based on how much it costs us to produce that water, not to essentially pass it through their meter and take into account everything else. So 49% for apparent losses and 39% for real losses. Again, very important with those two components as we move through the rest of this analysis. So when we're looking at the non-revenue water and we're looking at the different alternatives, we've said this a number of times in the past, it varies based on what alternative is selected and essentially how much it costs for us to produce the water. That would be the variable production cost versus adding in everything else, the distribution system, maintaining the storage tanks, etc. It's a circular calculation to see how this impacts, how non-revenue water impacts each alternative. We need to understand what the water rate is to calculate the true cost of losing water, and we can't calculate the true cost of how much we're losing unless we have the water rate. And to get the water rate, we need cost estimates for each one of these alternatives. So the next few slides walk through some very generalized alternatives just to give you an idea of how it impacts things. Once we get the capital costs together over the next month, we'll put it back through this and we'll tie it to the 5 alternatives such that we can look at the real long-term cost of dealing with non-revenue water. The other main thing I want to point out here, which again will carry forward on future slides, is recall that if you have a Lake Michigan system, you're required to get your non-revenue water down to 10%. So we were at 29% in 2018. At some point in the future, we have to get that down to 10%. Non-Lake Michigan alternatives don't necessarily have that requirement. Now, is it a good thing to get your non-revenue water down? For sure. There's a lot of reasons for it. Sustainability of the resource that you're using, being green. You need to fix your system so that long-term you can depend on it. Water main breaks cost money too, in time and energy and disruption to the community. So when we build these models, though, we specifically focus on getting the 10% down for the Lake Michigan system over a reasonable time frame, and then we look at alternatively for other sources if there's an economic reason to get to it a certain level, or essentially if we're just going to follow a process based on useful life of infrastructure. So walking through this table overall, try to get through this a little bit quickly, we wanted to show you again the impact of all 3 of these alternatives. The first alternative would be the existing system, the existing wells. So the total water rate, and it's based on amount of usage, and there's different plateaus within the city, but let's just say a very general residential water bill, the water rate would be about $5.37 a 1,000 gallons. Well, it cost Nick and his staff about 58 cents on average to pull that water out of the ground, treat it, and then send it into the system. The rest of the $5.37 within the system is the water mains, being able to maintain them. It's the pumps that are out in the system. It's the water towers. It's taking care of service lines that are within the right-of-way, et cetera. And that's a good percentage of it. That's the $4.79. Well, all that, after it gets into the system, is going to be consistent in every single alternative moving forward, right? We're going to have the same water system. We just need a different source of supply that will enter the system at probably a different location. So the $4.79 remains consistent across all 3 alternatives. Source A, or alternative source A, would be, well, what if the city, one of the alternatives was to buy water from a Lake Michigan supplied system that is already in place? Meaning, we're talking about the city of Chicago, we're talking about going potentially to DuPage Water Commission. DuPage Water Commission's, City of Chicago's rate's about $4 per 1,000 gallons. The DuPage Water Commission is about $5 per 1,000 gallons. There's going to be a little bit more to be able to pump that water to your system. So you can kind of think of alternative source A as a Lake Michigan system. So we add $5.50 to buy that water. The other component then is it's going to cost money to build the components to get it here. That could be more than likely hundreds of millions of dollars. And then if you look at the debt service, paying that off over a year, how much of your water rate needs to account for that? So again, in very general terms, I have no idea if the dollar is going to work out, but just wanted to show you the process. Let's put $1 down for debt service for that. So the total rate for alternative source A is $11.29. Again, variable production would be $5.50. After a customer's meter, $11.29. Alternative B says, well, what if we are able to develop our own source, whether it be Lake Michigan on our own, whether it be a river water source? How much is it going to cost us to pump that water out of that source, treat it, and then get it to the city of Joliet and distribute it? Well, taking some general numbers, for instance, the city of Aurora, city of Springfield, they're about $2 per 1,000 gallons, actually a little bit less than that right now for them to be able to pump their water out and treat it, and then send it out into the system. So we just use $2.50 as a variable cost of production there. Probably going to be a little more expensive to construct that type of system, putting an intake into Lake Michigan, putting an intake into the river, whatever it may be. Having the treatment plant, in some of these other alternatives, like the city of Chicago, they already have a treatment plant in place. So it's going to be a little higher capital cost, a little higher on debt service. If we put $3 on top of that, then the total rate is $10.29. Again, first two columns are the focus, variable cost of production, and the total cost to show you how it relates to things. So now let's take those numbers from a total rate and a variable cost of production and look at the three different alternatives and see what our costs would be if this was 2018 and you had any of those alternatives in place. So for your well water, following across, we have the apparent losses. Well, that's going to be that the cost of that is the total rate because that actually got to a meter and it was not billed to the degree that it should have been. So that was the 798,000 we saw on that pie chart. And then the real losses are that 58 cents per thousand or $580 per million gallons. So that is on the order of $800,000. Therefore, it's 1.65 million, 1.66 million if, again, you're using the well sources. If you follow the same methodology, alternate A, and if you're buying water at significantly higher, so 10 times the cost to produce that water, then it adds up to be significantly higher, 9.8 million in 1 year based on the non-revenue water. Well, the third alternative, if it costs you significantly less, in this case less than half, to actually produce that water, again, these are the real losses that are lost overall at $2.50 per thousand gallons. That number comes down. The total rate's slightly lower, so your apparent losses come down, and now you're looking at $5 million in non-revenue water. So if you take those in one given year and you look out, this system needs to be in place for, and we're planning out to 2050 at a minimum, but also be in place after. You can start to see how they compound. Before I get into some of the specific numbers, wanted to talk about strategies that the city would take to reduce non-revenue water. We've categorized them in different time frames, short-term, midterm, and long-term. And I actually, quite frankly, we're working with city staff right now to talk these through and vet them a little bit more. This whole presentation is in draft form, and it will come down to what can ultimately get funded. For instance, and I'm not going to read all of these to try to cut to the chase here, but the annual water loss audit, they actually already do that, and the plan is to continue to do that, to categorize where the water is and so they can go after it. Look at the billing process via flow chart. Maybe there is something going wrong in reading the meters and getting it through the accounting system so that we can make sure we can get those apparent losses down as low as possible. Look at the meter accuracy overall as well from the apparent losses. And the city does actually export a fair amount of water to other municipalities, sanitary districts, etc. We think a little finer look at that to make sure that that's all set up properly throughout the process, as well as the meters are reading accurately, will be important. From a midterm perspective, the city has essentially water meters anywhere that there is a water account within the city. The water meter technology continues to evolve and ultimately can get more accurate. It can also come up with better ways to look at water use within a particular residence or industry and then identify issues with that. So through also the automatic meter reading program, rather than at one time communities had to go and literally read the meter on every single meter, now the technology is there where actually all that information can come back and become useful, and then you can use it as part of this process as well. And then again, in the long term, looking at the exported water and water meter replacement programs. That was all the apparent losses. So that's all kind of the paper losses. On the real loss side of things, again, related to water that comes out of the system via the water mains that are under the ground or services leaking. The city has already done some level of and continues to do water main break analysis. When we're spending our money replacing these water mains that are 50 years, 60 years, 100 years old, where's the best spot to put our money and invest it? We're going to show you a couple charts or a couple points here as to where the city is going to focus overall. Perhaps if you have less pressure within your system, then maybe there would be less leaks throughout your system. So we're talking to Nick and his people operationally how things can be taken care of in that regard to potentially reduce the non-revenue water. On the midterm side of things, right now, water is sent out from a production site, and there's wells all over and treatment plants all over the community. Most of the time, the next place it's read from a meter perspective is inside a house or a resident. Well, can you break up areas and put in a meter that measures how much water is coming into that overall area so that you can correlate it with the meters inside the houses and businesses and segregate out areas and see if there's any issues there, which is the district metered areas. And then long-term, continue to work with the city council to fund the water main replacement program to reduce those real losses. Like I said, the city continues to look at water main breaks as a high point of real loss throughout the system. From 2013 to 2018, the average number of water main breaks was 213. That again, the water utility staff needed to deal with. There's a metric put out by AWWA that says that a recommended ceiling for water main breaks throughout a system is 25 breaks per 100 miles. A fully optimized system could get down to about 15, maybe down as low as 12. Right now, the city is as high as 33, so we're definitely above that metric, and we'll want to continue to focus on investing in changing out those water mains. The graph to the left on this slide, I think, is very telling. The blue bars show you the decade by which, in which the water mains were constructed throughout the city, the percentage of the system. So the 3 decades on the right, 1990 through 2010, shows you that over 60% of the water main that was put in the ground in the city of Joliet was put in the last 30 years-ish. And then it spreads across, many decades there. The 30s, of course, was pretty low, and then back, there is some water main that dates back to 1890. Now, when you look at the orange bar next to it, that's the percentage of water main breaks that are occurring on those mains that were constructed in that time period. Therefore, the years of 1940, 50, and 60, we see about 60-some% of our water main breaks occur there, whereas only about 19% of the system was constructed during that time frame. And that's actually a pretty well-known time period. Joliet is not the only community. In fact, it's pretty common across Illinois, especially. I'm not sure about the rest of the nation, but I'm guessing. What was the significance of that time frame? Well, it was World War II and the decades after World War II. And the ductile iron that was used, cast iron that was used in the mains may not have been of the same quality as during different time periods. So those tend to be the mains that break the most, and that's exactly what is happening in the city of Joliet. Therefore, as the city sets up their annual water main break program or annual water main replacement program, they need to look for water mains that were constructed in that time period and will get their biggest bang for their buck by replacing those. Another way to analyze this, well, how much is appropriate to invest in water main replacement? You have the amount of water loss, and we showed, 1.6 million, 9 million, 5 million, depending on the alternative per year. But the other side of it is well, how long are these water mains going to last? In general, the rule of thumb is somewhere between 60 and 100 years is what the useful life of a water main would be. We're seeing that the 40s, 50s, and 60s, that was not the case based on the type of iron that was developed, that went into the mains at that time. But if you look at kind of a percentage in a rule of thumb cost for the mains, at $7 million a year, it would take 130 years essentially to replace all the mains throughout the community. At $10 million a year, that would be 1% of the system, or essentially it would take 100 years to replace the mains within the system. At 16.4 million, which we believe is needed to achieve the 10% non-revenue water by 2040, or to get as close to it as possible, that would be a 60-year useful life on those mains. The city had been spending about $7 million over the last 5 years per year to get things going. They are moving in the direction of funding $10 million per year over the next 5 years. And then, depending on the alternative, may want to relook at that and be heading towards more of the 16 million. Now, I say that, you guys all recognize this, right? These are big numbers, and then that often typically requires the water rates to be adjusted to fund that. So it has to be a balance between what makes sense from a water rate perspective as well as the annual investment in water main replacement. A couple graphs here. I think I only have about 3 more slides, but just to show you the order of magnitude. A lot of things going on here, but really wanted to just show you that the difference in cost for these different alternatives. The yellow dashed line on the bottom there is, your non-revenue water cost if you were with your well system. So it's quite frankly pretty low in relative terms. When you jump up to that alternate source B loss cost, it starts to get more significant on the order of that $5 million. Because the programmed in here is water main replacement on the time frames we've suggested here, you do see a decline. But then if it's not funded beyond 2040, that starts to build up. And then the top alternative, or the top blue line, dashed line, is that alternative A. If you were to buy water from, say again, the City of Chicago DuPage Water Commission, because the cost for the variable cost of production is higher to significantly higher than the current system, those costs are significant overall. This would be, and I guess I should have said to begin with, this graph is looking at the 1.6% annual water main replacement. So that's the 60-year time frame, useful life. This would be if you go with the 1% annual replacement, the 100-year time frame. The physical cost to replace water mains goes down, but the cost of the water loss goes up because you're not able to reduce the non-revenue water at the same level that you would have been if you're replacing at 1.6%. And then lastly, just to flip it the other way, is the projected revenue saved by reducing water loss. For the portion of water loss that you're able to essentially keep within the mains, keep within the service lines, bill to folks, you continue to save money. And as you reduce your non-revenue water, then you increase your revenues, and out in time, getting out to 2040, it starts to get up in that $9 million range, for instance, for the alternate source A, you obviously save less on the other alternatives because it's cheaper ultimately to produce that water and send it out into the system. So with that, any questions? Yes, sir?
Using your figures then, in order to accelerate the replacement of these mains, it's going to cost about $25 to $30 per resident, per household in order to achieve that.
Okay, so you must have a better mathematic mind than mine, because how were you?
Too low or too high?
It's too high.
Okay.
Yeah, for the water portion of the bill, that's too high.
How many residential units do we have?
Rounded to 50,000.
Well, with 50,000 into 16 million comes out about $26 a month.
So 50,000
we can check
water
my
bills.
figures, but that's what I calculated.
I'm sorry, you did 50,000 water bills because there would be about 3 people per house. Is that what you're saying?
Well, it's about 50,000 units and $16 million a year.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was not following the 16 million. I was going off our current. I misunderstood your question.
Yeah. In order to,
we're
losing more water every year.
Sure.
In order to get ahead of that curve, we're going to have to spend the 16 million, basically.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was going off a current. Absolutely. Yep.
So $25 to $30 a month is about what we need to be spending, or each.
And the 16 million also accounts for the necessary spend to achieve the reduction based on the Lake Michigan Compact, or?
No, it doesn't. So the 16 million is just for, at this point, it's just for the water main replacement.
Right.
So, and I think you're hitting on something here. when we're looking at each one of these alternatives, not only do we need to factor in that cost of the $16 million, for instance, of water main replacement for a Lake Michigan system, we'll also have to factor in that we have to build $9 million extra on the units of water that get to the meter, because we still need to pay, if we go that alternate, the city of Chicago, that $9 million that never got there overall. But if we have our own water treatment plant and it only costs us $2.50, for instance, to generate that, then the cost that will be factored into the overall cost model will be around $5 million. So instantly you have about a $4 million savings
But
per year.
that puts more cost up front in order to accomplish that.
No, because the water main replacement dollar amount, you could do it at $16 million each. We are saying that it's $16 million to get a 60-year useful life. We think that that's needed to get to 10% non-revenue water by 2040. That's the target that we've established. Under the Lake Michigan alternative, you are required to do that. If you're looking at it from an economic perspective, rate elasticity, what makes sense for your community, if you go with an alternative B, you may not want to or need to spend the 16 million. Nobody's forcing you to get down to the 10%. So you might only spend 10 million in water main replacement. Those two numbers are set to the side, right, in your capital costs. The other component is then, if you're paying somebody for the water that's lost, ultimately, maybe this is what you meant. If you're only spending $10 million per year, you're going to have a little higher real losses in the alternative B situation, because you're not reducing your non-revenue water at the pace that you are for the Lake Michigan system. So instead of, say, the 5 million, it might be 6 or 7 million, and then it gets a little closer to the 9 million of the Lake Michigan system. Again, we're building those models along with the capital costs so that we can factor in the rates properly and the time frames with the alternatives.
Yes, Bruce.
Bruce Remick again. If you go back to one of your first slides where it gave the current and source A and source B, you've got to include the fact that your water bill is going to go up because you're paying approximately twice as much for it anyway, per 1,000 gallons. So all this gets loaded on top of that. Am I correct?
It's loaded on the 479,
Okay.
which is just for your distribution system only.
Okay, so you're talking about sizable increases in cost here.
Sizable,
And if
yes.
you need to panic somebody, that should do it. Thank you.
He said that, not me.
Well, he's a bill payer, that's why.
Okay, you happy to see me sit down now?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Water treatment 101.
I said it today. Remember that.
Thank you. So Joe Johnson again with Stantec. So tagging on to what Jeff is doing, I think maybe we should have explained this a little bit before, but over the past couple of months, we've shown you a couple of matrices where we talked about the total cost of water that we have to come up with for all these alternatives so we get an apples to apples comparison. Each of these discussions kind of relates to a part of that total cost of water. So Jeff's discussion about non-revenue water, it's, as he explained, it's different depending on the alternative. So we need to have a consistent basis for calculating that number and plugging into each alternative. And so water treatment is somewhat similar. And I'm not going to get into nearly the level of detail that he did on water treatment, but we did just want to take a few minutes tonight and kind of introduce people to the idea that there are different degrees of water treatment depending on what we're trying to accomplish, and that has to also fit into our overall calculation. So why do we treat water? Well, we treat it to remove harmful bacteria and pathogens that can make people sick. We want to remove chemicals and compounds that pose a risk to public health. We want to make the water taste good, smell good, and look good so people are interested in drinking it. And we want to maintain the quality of the water when it's being delivered to customers. And there's been a real evolution, if you will, in water treatment. 200 years ago, people didn't really understand the idea that things in water could make people sick. It was the early 1800s when somebody in London actually was the first one to suggest that the contamination of the water coming from a well was what was making people sick and killing them. And so that started a real revolution in terms of water treatment, understanding, okay, we have to deal with these things. The initial focus was on bacteria and how do we keep that water clean. As we've developed as a society and developed more industries and more chemicals and compounds, we found that those things are getting in the water, and we have to be more aggressive in treating that water and making sure it's clean. And really, as our ability to analyze water and understand what's in it, as that has gotten better, our expectations for water treatment have gotten better. So the parameters that Nick is sampling for and that water systems are regulated on, some of these are measured now in parts per billion or parts per trillion. And maybe one way to think about it, since we're talking about money tonight, right? A part per billion is if you had a pile of pennies here that was worth $10 million. So $10 million worth of pennies on the floor. 1 part per billion is 1 penny in that pile. So it's a very, very small amount, but research has demonstrated that some of these contaminants at those levels can cause problems, so we have to be aggressive. So water treatment has become quite complex in terms of making sure we meet people's expectations. So the process we use to treat water depends on a variety of things. Number one, the characteristics of the source water. If we're treating very clean lake water, we use a certain process. If we're treating a water that's variable in terms of its characteristics, that takes perhaps a different process. If we're treating groundwater, that requires a different process. Or if you go out west to some places or the far south, if you're treating salt water to desalinate it and drink that, obviously there's a different process there. The goals for treated water are important. So for our study here, what we've done is we've looked across all the alternatives, and we've said that all the alternatives need to provide Joliet with a safe, reliable, clean, attractive source of water based on current standards. So we're looking at the way water is treated in existing treatment plants in Lake Michigan, other river water plants, and basically making sure that we have a consistent level of treatment there. Could the city decide, if it's building its own system with a water treatment plant, could you decide you want a more aggressive level of treatment? Absolutely. There's a cost trade-off in that calculation, and that's where we would need input if that's a critical factor. And then the last factor is system-specific constraints or preferences. You go to some places in the United States and around the world, and people are very happy to drink well water with a lot of minerals in it. They've grown up with it. They like the taste of that water. You go to other people, and they would say, no, I don't want that. So there is a bit of personal preference that we have to consider as well. So the typical kinds of treatment, and there are many, many variations on this, but with groundwater, typically people will either treat that water with something called ion exchange, which is really a softening process. We try to take out some of the ions or chemical compounds or parameters that cause hardness in the water or cause taste, and they're replaced with an ion exchange system. In Joliet, you currently have HMO filtration systems at many of your water treatment plants. They're designed to remove radium. And so that's a treatment process that removes that material from the water, filters the water out, and then sends those undesirable compounds to the sewer system. Surface water treatment plants are a little different, but typically there's what we call conventional treatment. I'll show you a diagram of that in a minute, but it really involves some settling and some filtration and then disinfection. It's a pretty basic system that's used widely for surface water systems. And in some cases, you may also see lime softening systems. So for example, City of Aurora, their river water system uses a lime softening system where they use lime in the process to also remove some of the constituents in the water and soften it to a degree that's acceptable for the community. And as I mentioned, there are advanced treatment methods. membrane filtration, reverse osmosis. I know the gentleman from the hospital, I think, mentioned in their case they use reverse osmosis because they have to have a very pure water. One of the challenges with those advanced systems is that you do create a waste stream. So you could, in order to remove all those impurities in the water, you end up rejecting a certain amount of that water. And so your efficiency is a little bit different. And again, that has to be considered. But different communities, again, have looked at that. In Illinois, there's a mix. There are a few systems on Lake Michigan that have installed membranes. Not very many, but in some cases it's done for taste and odor. In other cases it's done for other parameters. But there are a variety of methods. And then with disinfection, most commonly people use chlorine, some type of chlorine compound to disinfect the water and inactivate any bacteria that might be in the water. But there are other options there, ozone and UV disinfection or other methods where either ozone is a very strong oxidant or UV disinfection uses UV light to disinfect that water before it's treated. So a lot of options here to be considered. Oops, let's go one more here. So for the purpose of our analysis, again, to have a consistent basis for looking at these treatment systems, for the Lake Michigan systems, City of Chicago and the DuPage Water Commission, which buys water from Chicago, already use a conventional water treatment process. Now, I won't go through all the details here, but basically it's a process where you settle the water first, so you try to settle out particulate matter. There are some chemicals that are added, some coagulants that are added to the water before the settling process to try to get some of the smaller particles to clump together so they settle better. That's called flocculation. You try to build these flocks or clumps of particles. They settle in the settling tanks, and then that settled water is sent to a filter system. And typically, the current state of practice is typically these are dual media filters. So they may have a bed of gravel in the bottom, a bed of finer sand, and usually a coal or an anthracite layer that's used to filter the water and remove impurities through filtration. That filtered water is then disinfected to kill off any residual bacteria or pathogens that might be in the water. And then that finished water or treated water is stored and pumped out to the system. This is very similar. This is the process that's used by Chicago at their 2 plants, by the city of Evanston, which operates about a 100 million gallon per day plant on Lake Michigan, Winnetka, Wilmette, a number of other communities along the Lake Michigan shore. Lime softening is similar type of process, but a little bit different. There's a little bit more different chemical addition early on. And again, this is specifically targeted at trying to remove calcium and manganese that contribute to hardness in the water. So there's some chemicals that are added up front. In this particular case, it shows a reactor that mixes the chemicals in the water and then settles that particulate matter out. Because of the chemicals that are added, there's some recarbonation that's done to kind of bring the water back to a stable pH. And then that water is again filtered, disinfected, and prepared for treatment. So these are just, again, samples to give you an idea of the types of processes that are out there. These are the flow processes that we're using to develop our high-level costs for treatment for this project. So the conventional system would be what we're looking at for a Lake Michigan, an Indiana supply, where Joliet's operating its own treatment plant, and the lime softening is what's being looked at for the river water supplies. And as I mentioned before, there are a variety of advanced treatment methods. As of right now, again, the treatment methods, the conventional treatment methods that we've talked about are what's currently being used in Illinois to satisfy all the current regulatory requirements. And so we're using those as our baseline for estimating costs. We have not built in costs at this point into our treatment costs for any type of advanced treatment, either membrane filtration or reverse osmosis or anything of that nature. So that provides us with basically an apples-to-apples comparison across the alternatives, so that whether you're buying water, whether you're treating your own water from Lake Michigan or you're treating your own water from a river source, we're working with a consistent goal in terms of treated water quality and a consistent basis for estimating our costs. So that's all I was really going to go through on water treatment. Are any questions or additional information I can offer?
You know, Joe, I did have one question. So you said you're not going to include any of this in your numbers?
Unless there's direction that we need to go there. So what we're trying to do.
Like as alternates, you know,
Sorry?
as alternates.
Right, and I think we can certainly talk about that. And again, I think it's important to understand that at this stage of Joliet's process, what we believe is really important is to make sure that you have consistent, reliable, accurate data across the alternatives so that you can choose your source or choose your approach. Once you've decided on that approach, there are you still have lots of opportunity during the design process to say, well, wait a minute, you know, are we worried about something else? Do we want to look at UV disinfection as opposed to chlorination? So you're not closing any doors right now, but we are trying to make sure you have a consistent basis for making your selection.
Thank you.
So if Joliet were to buy water from Chicago or DePage, we'd be buying treated water.
Correct.
Would not need any of those processes that you just discussed.
That is correct.
What would, in ballpark numbers, what would a 60 million gallon per day treatment plant at Lake Michigan cost? 50 million or 300 million?
It's in the range of, you know, anywhere from $2 to $4 a gallon. So I'm sorry, you said 50 million gallons? 60 million gallons. So might be on the order of 100 to 200 million dollars, somewhere in that range, maybe more. But it varies. There are obviously a lot of factors that go into that, but that's the order of magnitude of what we're talking about.
Thank you.
Bruce.
Yeah, again, I hate to interrupt, but after you run this through a 40-mile pipeline from City of Chicago or Lake Michigan Treatment Plant or whatever to Joliet, do you need to do anything on this end to polish the water? And is that cost included in this?
No, that's a great question. So if you think back to my first slide, we talked about the goals of water treatment. And the last goal that's on that list is really kind of a new development, is how do we treat the water so that we make sure it's as good a quality when it comes out of the customer's tap as it was when it left the water treatment plant. You know, historically the focus has been on how do we treat the water at the water plant, but we know now that there are factors that affect the water. So in response to your question, certainly water age is an issue. You know, we disinfect water, we put chemicals in it to kill off bacteria. Over time, the power of those disinfectants wear off, and it is possible that you could get regrowth in the water. So with these long transmission mains, one of the things that we look at is water age, and there may be a necessity to have say a booster disinfection station somewhere along the system, so that if the disinfectant is going to decay over time, you would then boost it, provide additional chlorine or additional disinfectant at some point to make sure that you maintain that residual disinfection or disinfectant in the water. The other factor that I think was alluded to earlier that's going to be a significant consideration for Joliet is the treatment process affects the stability of your water. So that, you know, water has a chemistry all of its own. And as we're seeing around the country, when you change water sources, that chemistry changes, and that can affect the equilibrium of what's in your pipes. Normally, all of our water systems are operating in such a way that we try to make sure that there's a bit of a coating on the inside of the pipes, so that the water is, if you will, kind of coating the inside of the pipe, and that we're not corroding material off the pipe into that water, so that it's clean when it gets to the customer. I think there obviously have been evidence, you know, cases around the country where with a change of source, that chemistry changes, and if the treatment process is not properly managed, you can create a situation where you do corrode material off the inside of the pipe and cause a water quality issue. So these are some of the discussions I know staff and the team have been having with the Illinois EPA about how, over the course of this long-term program, are we going to make sure we get the treatment issue correct, so that the stability of the water is maintained and we're confident of its quality all the way to the customer.
Thank you.
Okay, good. Thanks.
Water Conservation Subcommittee report. Maria.
All right, so we've been working on a couple of different things on our subcommittee. Most importantly for you to know is that we are looking at media partnerships with WJOL Channel 6 And so there'll be a meeting hopefully coming up where we can talk about a partnership to help us get the word out now, like Wayne said. And then we're working with our PR firm to see ways we can hit different generations. We're also just received a letter. Commissioner Rodriguez has connected us to District 86. And so we're going to look at working, hopefully partnering with them as well to move something forward in education of water conservation and what's happening with our water locally. And then we're hoping to maybe partner or reach out, do something with businesses as well. So to Wayne's point, trying to hit different areas. Of course, this is going to take time, but until we get the water to tap, we have a couple of years that we can keep working on this. So I've said it before, I invite anyone to attend or email us with ideas for our next meeting, which is Wednesday, September 25th. And then I think I'd like to, of course, encourage everyone to do your part out there and rethink water.
Thank you. Nick, do you have anything? Is there any other new or old business that we need to put on the agenda for next meeting, or any new business that came up, or articles or things to share, or anything of that nature? No? Other public comments? Bruce?
Bruce Renwick, 1508 West Acres Road, Joliet. I've heard this week that Commissioner Hurtko was asked to resign from the commission. Okay? I will tell you, I don't think it's the commission's fault. I don't think you had anything to do with it. I think you're doing a pretty good job. I would point out, however, that asking one of the more outspoken, vocal commissioners to retire or leave the commission at this point in time does not leave what I would call a clear and transparent feeling in people's minds. Okay? I don't know why he was asked. I don't care really at this point. Unless he committed some criminal act, it's not my business. Okay? But what I want to do is I want to say I'm very disappointed in the leadership of Joliet, because as far as I know, the leadership of Joliet are the only people that could ask you to resign from the commission. And again, this just goes back to the whole thing about, well, what's really happening here? I'm glad to see today that we finally started seeing some dollars and cents, because I think dollars and cents are going to be necessary, even leading up to the December meeting. I think those numbers are going to move around. I hope they'll get pinned down a little bit better. But from what I can see now, there's a lot of money out there. Okay? As I say, I think Commissioner Hurtko was an asset to this group. I'm personally sorry to see him go. And I don't hold you guys responsible. I hold the leadership in Joliet responsible. Thank you.
So I know that we've been meeting now for a couple of years, and Bruce, you've been here since the beginning at all the meetings, and I appreciate all of the information that you've brought forward, because I know that you've certainly educated me. I know every single member of this commission. Maria's put in a massive amount of time in the subcommittee. Doc Hurtko has been phenomenal in passing out articles, and I've learned a tremendous amount from him. So I don't believe that Dr. Hurtko has resigned. I don't believe that he intends to resign. I think everyone has spent a lot of time on this, and I think sometimes form over substance can carry the day, and I certainly can be a person who gets a little animated in how I describe things. So at the end of the day, every single person on this board, and I think everyone that's participated in the process, wants the same thing for Joliet. And that is to deliver a great quality water, a reasonable price, and protect the long-term infrastructure with the city of Joliet. How we get there, we all may have differences of opinion. I know that Dr. Herco and I haven't always agreed on everything, but I think everybody here has been working hard, and sometimes a lot of hours can put people under stress, and they can sometimes express themselves in ways that maybe they might, in retrospect, not wish to. But at any rate, I think that we're moving forward, and I think that all of the members of the commission will be able to come together and put forth a recommendation to the city council. And I think that the fact that this commission exists is an indication of the fact that the leadership of the city of Joliet does want to be transparent, because there was no mandate for this board, and there was no mandate for all of us to come together as volunteers, because we don't get paid anything to do this, so, other than feeling good. So I don't know if anybody else has anything. Yeah, Les.
No.
Yes, sir.
And again, I thank the commission for all their good work. It's really difficult to lose sight of the end game, you know, kind of forget the forest for the trees. So I would encourage you to kind of step back and think about the end game from time to time. I see three major factors. One, in trying to find the best source of water for the future. I believe since we're so close to Lake Michigan, that's a no-brainer. It's just how we do it. The second is, how do we plug the leaks? And you know, no matter how you look at it, dollar and cents wise, how you model it, I understand things need to be modeled, and you need to express that to make good decisions. But the bottom line is, how do we plug the leaks? I love some of the ideas of, okay, looking at the infrastructure, 40s, 50s, and 60s, the pipes were pretty much not up to par. And the other concept of, I really like the idea of district metering, to kind of try to figure out where the leaks really are, and to look at this from maybe a number of different perspectives to really come up with the best solution. I think the city has done a good job with upping the ante in replacing water mains. I think we need to do much more, and I'd really like to see that $16 million. I think no matter how you look at it, you plug the leaks, you save money, okay? And then the third thing is conservation. And with any of these things, looking at sources of water, plugging the leaks, conservation, the other thing, and I know it's a small commission, and you guys are doing a great job. If there's any way that we can tap into what people have done before, you know, what have other cities around the country done before? What have they done for conservation? I mean, we're not in the same kind of a situation like California, Colorado, some of those areas are that have had to push conservation for many years. So what are they doing? What are they doing that's effective, not only from the standpoint of actual action, but what are they doing from the standpoint of publicity? As far as plugging the leaks, we're not the only city in the country that has 100-year-old infrastructure. There are a lot older cities out east. What have they done to plug the leaks? What's their strategy? What have they found to be effective? And you know, I think sometime stepping back and taking a fresh approach and maybe asking some more questions like this might be helpful. But thank you so much for doing this, for being here, and continuing to make us aware. Thanks.
Thank you.
I would like to say something. Can I say something?
Yeah, absolutely.
Bruce, in response to your address, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that there was a meeting with with Mayor Odekirk, and he gave assurances to Dr. Hertko that he was not in any way intending for him to resign. So, and I know I've learned a lot. If I had to learn any more, I'd probably want to be paid. We are an advisory board, we're volunteers, we do spend a lot of time. Doc Kirko spends an incredible amount of time doing this and is pretty knowledgeable to ask the questions and make the comments that he makes. So I don't think he's leaving, but I certainly hope not. And like I say, there was assurance from the mayor, and he's the one that controls that. That's it.
Any comments? I think the next meeting is when, Nick?
October 8th.
October 8th?
Yeah, October 8th.
Okay, so October 8th, same bat time, same bat channel.
3 more times.
Any more public comments?
Chairman,
Yes.
I might as well make a final comment. We're all volunteers. I know it's been said over and over again. Our job and our responsibility is to look at all of the various different options and dive into it and have an opinion. So any commissioner that speaks up and has an opinion should do so, right? We may disagree sometimes on those opinions, but this late in the game, no one should be asked to kind of leave the commission or have that kind of pressure put on them. So for those that thought that that was a good idea, I would probably ask that you consider otherwise, because this is a big deal and it's going to be quite costly. And I don't want any question of the transparency in the process, and to make those recommendations to ask someone to leave a volunteer commission position like this discredits the effort and the work that we're doing. So
Thank you.
that's all.
Any further public comments or comments from the commission? Seeing no further comments.
Move to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn made by Mr. Horn. Commissioner Horn?
Second.
Commissioner Biley, or Riggs, I'm sorry. I was looking at Biley and heard Riggs. Seconded by Commissioner Riggs. Roll call.
Just need a favor.
All in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Hearing
That's
none.
what happens when you miss a meeting. Meeting adjourned. Fumbled at the end.